Hi friends, continuing to the chapter, The Namesake. In the beginning, for the most of the days, he had started at his bedroom ceilings at the three beach blades of a fan glaring at its center. They edged grimsy. He could hear the top edge of a calendar scribbling against the wall behind him when the fan was on. If he moved his neck to the right, he had a view of a window with a dusty bottle of a Dettol on its ledge. And if the shutters were open, the concrete of the wall that surrounded the house, the plain brown sequoias that scrambled there. He listened to the constant parade of the sound outside. Footsteps, bicycle bells, the incense squalling of the crowds and of the horns of the cycle rickshaw in the lanes so narrow that the taxi could not fit. He heard the tube well at the corner being pumped into urns. Every evening at the dusk he heard a conch shell being blown in the house next door to signal the hour for prayer. He could smell but not see the shimmering green sludge that collected in the open sewer. Life within the house continued. His father came and went from work. His brother and the sisters from the school. His mother worked in the kitchen, checking in on him periodically, her lap stained with an turmeric. Twice daily the maid twisted rags into the buckets of water and wiped the floors. During the day he was groggy from painkillers. At night he dreamed either that he was still trapped inside the train or worse, that the accident had never happened, that he was walking down a street, taking a bath, sitting cross-legged on the floor and eating a plate of food. And then he would wake up coated in sweat, tears streaming down his face, convinced that he would never live to do such things again. Eventually, in an attempt to avoid his nightmares, he began to read late at nights, which was when his motionless body felt most restless, his mind agile and clear. Yet he refused to read the Russians his grandfather had brought to his bedsides, or any novel for that matters. Those books set in the countries he had never seen reminded him only of his confidant. Instead, he read his engineering books, trying to keep his best to keep up with his course, solving equation by flashlights. In those silent hours, he thought often of Gosh. Back a pillow and a blanket, he heard Gosh says. He remembered the address Gosh has written on a paper on his diary. Somewhere behind the tram depot in Tollygun. Now it was the home of a widow, a fatherless son. Each day to the bluster, his spirit, his family reminded him of the future. The day he would stand unassisted, walk across the room. It was for this each day that his father and mother prayed. For this that his mother gave up a meat on Wednesdays. But as the months passed, Ashok began to envision another sort of future. He imagined not walking but walking away as far as he could from the place in which he was born and in which he had nearly died. The following year, with the aid of a cane, He returned to the college and graduated. And without telling his parents, he applied to continue his engineering studies abroad. Only after he had been accepted with a full fellowship, a newly issued passport in the hand, did he inform them of his plans. But was already nearly lost you once, his bewildered father had protested. His sibling had pleaded and wept. His mother, speechless, had refused food for 3 days. In spite of all that, he had gone. 7 years later, there are still certain images that wipes him flat. They lurk around a corner as he rushes through the engineering department at MIT. Check his campus mail. They hover by his shoulders as he leans over a plate of rice at dinner time or netless against Ashima's limb at night. At every turning point in his life, at his wedding, he stood behind Ashima, encircling her waist and peering over her shoulders as they poured puffed rice into a fire, or during his first hours in America, seeing a small grey city coked with snow. He had tried but failed to push these images away. The twisted, battered, capsized bogies of the train. His body twisted below it. The terrible crunching sound he had heard but not comprehended, his bones crushed as fine as flowers. It is not the memory of a pain that haunted him. He had no memory of that. It is the memory of waiting before he was rescued, and the persistent fear rising up in his throat that he might not have been recused at all. To this the day he is claustrophobic, holding his breath in elevators, feel pent up in the car unless the windows are open on both the sides. On planes, he requires the bullhead seats. At times, the wailing of the children fills him with the deepest dread. At times, he still presses his ribs to make sure they are solid. He presses them now. In the hospital, shaking his head in the disbelief. Although it is Ashima who carries the child, he too feels heavy with the tug of the life, of his life and the life about to come from it. He was raised without running water, nearly killed at 22. Again he tastes the dust of his tongue, see the twisted train, the giant overturned iron wheels. None of this was supposed to happen, but no, he had survived it. He was born twice in India, and the third time in America. 3 lives by 30. For this, he thanked his parents and their parents and the parents of their parents. He doesn't not thank God. He openly revises, marks, and quietly refuses the religion. But there is one more soul he has to thank. He cannot thank the book. The book has perished, as he nearly did in the scratched pieces in the earliest hours of an October day, in a field of 209 kilometers from Calcutta. Instead of thanking, he thanked Gogol, the Russian writer who had saved his life. With Patty enters the waiting room. The baby, a boy, is born at 5 past 5 in the morning. He measured 20 inches long, weighed 7 pounds 9 ounces. Ashima initial glimpse before the cord is clipped and they carry him away is of a creature coated with a thick white paste and streak of a blood, her blood, on her shoulders, feet and head. A needle placed in a small of her back has removed all the sensation from her waist to her knees and given her a blistering headache in the final stage of the delivery. When it is all over, she begins to shiver profoundly, as if pierced with an acute fever. For half an hour she trembles, in a daze, covered by a blanket, her inside empty, her outside still misshapen. She is unable to speak, to allow the nurse to help exchange her blood-soaked gown for a fresh one. In spite of endless glasses of water, her throat is parched. She is told to shit on a toilet, to quiet warm water from a bottle between her legs. Eventually, she is sponged clean, brought into a new gown, wheeled into yet another room. The light are soothing them, and there is only one another bed next to her, empty for the time being. When Ashok arrives, Patty is taking Ashima's blood pressure and Ashima is reclining against a pile of pillows. The child wrapped like an oblong white parcel in her arms. Beside the bed is an bassinet, labeled with a card that says Baby Boy Ganguly. He is here, she says quietly, looking up at Ashok with a weak smile. Her skin is faint yellow, the color missing from her lips. She had circles beneath her eyes, and her hair, spilling from its braid, looks as though it has not been combed for days. Her voice is hoarse, as if she had caught a cold. He pulls up a chair by the side of a bed, and Patty helps to transfer the child from mother to the father's arm. In the process, the child pierces the silence in the room with a short-lived cry. His parents react with mutual alarm, but Patty laughs approvingly. You see, Patty says to Ashima, he is already getting to know you. Ashok does as Patty tells him, stretching out his arm, putting one hand below the neck, another below the bottom. Go on, Patty urges. He wants to be held tightly. He is stronger than you think. Ashok lifts the minisole's parcel higher, closer to his chest like this. There you go, Patty says. I will leave you three alone for a while. At first, Ashok is more perplexed than moved by the pointless of the head, the puffiness of the lid, the small white spot on the cheeks, the fleshy upper lips that droops prominently over the lower one. The skill is plainer than either Ashima's or his own. Translucent enough to show slim green veins at the temples. The scalp is covered by a mask of an wispy black hair. He attempts to count the eyelashes. He feels gently through the funnel for the hands and the feet. It's all three, Ashima says, watching her husband. I already checked. What are their eyes like? Why won't he open them? He had opened them. She nods. What can he see? Can he see us? I think so, but not very clearly, and not in the full color, not yet. They sit in a silence, the three of them as still as stones. How are you feeling? Was it all right? He asked Azima. But there is no answer. And when Ashoka lifts his gaze from his son's face, he sees that she too is sleeping. When he looks back to the child, the eyes are open, staring up at him, unblinking, as dark as the hair on its head. The face is transformed. Ashoka had never seen more perfect things. He imagined himself as dark, grainy, blurry presence, as a father to his son. Again he thinks of the night he was nearly killed. The memory of those hearts that have forever marked him flickering, unfading in his mind. Being rescued from the shattered train, he had been the first miracle of his life. But here, now responding in his arms, waiting next to nothing but changing everything is the second. Apart from his father, the baby had three visitors, all Bengali, Maya and Dilip Nandi, and a young married couple in Cambridge whom Ashima and Ashoke met a few months ago in Purity Supreme, and Dr. Gupta, a mathematician, postdoc from Dehradun, a bachelor's in his 50s, whom Ashoke has befriended in the corridors of MIT. A feeding time, the gentlemen, including Ashoke, step out into the hall. Maya and Dilip give the boy a rattle and a baby book, which places for their parents to commerciate every possible aspect of his infancy. There is even a circle in which to paste a few starts from his first haircut. Dr. Gupta gave the boy an handsome illustrated copy of Mother Goose Rhymes. Lucky boy, Ashoke remarks, turning the beautiful swing pages. Only hours old and already the owners of the book. What a difference, he thinks, from the childhood he has known. Ashima thinks the same, though for the different reasons. For as grateful as she feels for the company of Nandis and Dr. Gupta, these acquaintances are also substitutes for the people who really ought to be surrounded them. Without a single grandparent or a parent or uncle or aunt at her side. The baby's birth, like most everything else in America, feels somehow haparized, only half a true. As she strokes and suckles and studies her son, she can't help but pity him. She had never known of a person entering the world so alone, so deprived, because neither of the grandparents has a working telephone. Their only link to home is by telegram, which Ashoke has sent to both sides in Calcutta. With your blessing, boys and mother, fine. As for a name, they have decided to let Ashima's grandmother, who is past 80 now, who had named each of her other 6 great grandchildren in the world, do the honor. When her grandmother learned of Ashima's pregnancy, she was particularly thrilled at the prospect of naming the family's first Sahib. And so Ashima and Ashoke have agreed to put off the decisions of what to name the baby until a letter comes, ignoring the forms from the hospital about filling for a birth certificate. Ashima's grandmother had mailed the letter herself, walking with her cane to the post office, her first trip out of the house in a decade. The letter contains one name for a girl and one for a boy. Ashima's grandmother has revealed them to no one. Though the letters was sent a month ago, in July, it has yet to arrive. Ashima and Ashok are not terribly concerned. After all, they both know an infant doesn't really need a name. He needs to be fed and blessed, to be given some gold and silver, to be patted on the back after feedings, and held carefully behind the neck. Names can wait. In India, parents take their time. It wasn't unusual for years to pass before the right names. The best possible name was determined. Ashima and Ashok can both possible names cite examples of the cousin who were not officially named until they were registered at 6 or 7 in the school. Nandis and Dr. Gupta understand perfectly. Of course, you must wait. They agree. Wait for the name in his great grandmother's letter. Beside there are always pet names to tie on one over. A practice of Bengalis nomenclature grants to every single person 2 names. In Bengali, the word for the pet name is Dakman, meaning literally the name by which one is called by friend, family, and the other intimates, at home and in the other private, unguarded moments. Pet names are a persistent remnant of the childhood, a reminder that a life is not always so serious, so formal, so complicated. They are a reminder too that one is not all the things to all people. They all have a pet names. Ashima pet name is Monu. Ashok is Mitu. And even as adults, these are the names by which they are known in their respective families. The names by which they are adored and scolded and missed and loved. Every pet name is praised with a good name, a Babylon, for identification in the outside world. Consecutively, good names appears on envelopes, on diplomas, in the telephone directories, and in all other public places. For these reasons, letter from Ashima's mother says Ashima on the outside, Monu on the inside. Good names tend to represent dignified and enlightened qualities. Ashima means she who is limitless without borders. Ashok, the name of an emperor, means he who transcends the grief. Pet names have no such aspirations. Pet names are never recorded officially, only uttered and remembered. Unlike the good names, pet names are frequently meaningless, deliberately silly, ironic, even onomatopoeic. Often in one infancy, one answer unwittingly to the dozen of pet names until one eventually sticks. At one point, when the baby screws up his rosy, wrinkled face and regards his small circles of admirers, Mr. Nandi leans over and calls the baby Buro, the Bengali word for old man. What his name, Buro? Patty inquires brightly, bearing another tray of an baked chicken for Ashima. Ashok lifts the lid and polishes off the chicken. Ashima is now officially referred to by the maternity nurses as the jello and the ice cream lady. No, that is not a name, Ashima explains. We haven't chosen. My grandmother is choosing. Patty nods. Will she be here soon? Ashima laughs. Her first genuine laugh after giving birth. The thought of her grandmother, born in the previous century, a Shirkan woman in the widow white and with a white, tawny skin that refuses to the wrinkle, boarding a plane and flying to the Cambridge is inconceivable to her. A thought that no matter how welcome, how derisible, feels entirely impossible, absurd. No, but a letter will. That evening, Ashok goes home to the apartment, checks for the letter. 3 days come and go. Azima is shown by the nursing staff how to change the diaper and how to clean the umbilical stub. She is given a hot salt water bath to soothe her burns and stitches. She is given a list of an pediatricians and countless brochures on breastfeeding and bonding, an amusing and sample of baby shampoos and Q-tips and creams. The fourth day, there is a good news and a bad news. The good news is that Azimas and the baby are to be discharged the following morning. The bad news is that they are told by Mr. Wilcox, completer of the hospital birth certificate, that they must choose a name for their son. For they learn that in America, a baby cannot be released from the hospital without a birth certificate. At that birth certificate needs a name. But sir, Asma protests. We can't possibly name him ourselves. Mr. Wilcox, slight, bald, unassumed, glanced at the couple, both visibly distressed. Then glanced at the nameless child. I see, he says, the reason being. We are writing for a letter, Ashok says, explaining the situation in detail. I see, Mr. Wilcox says again. This is unfortunate. I am afraid your only alternative is to have the certificate read Baby Boy Ganguly. You will, of course, be inquired to amend the permanent record when a name is decided upon. Azima looks at Ashok exponentially. Is that what we should do? I don't recommend it, Mr. Wilcox says. You will have to appear before a judge, pay a fee. The red tape is endless. Oh dear, Ashok says. Mr. Wilcox nods and silence ensures. Don't you have any backups? He asks. Azima frowns. What does it mean, backups? Well, something in reserve in case you didn't like what your grandmothers had chosen. Azima and Ashok shake their heads. It has never occurred to either of them to question Azima's grandmother's selection to disregard an elder wishes in such a way. You can always name his after yourself or one of your ancestors. Mr. Wilcox admitted that he is actually Howard Wilcox III. It is a fine traditional. The King of the France and the England did it. He adds, but it isn't possible. Azima and the Ashok think to themselves. This tradition doesn't exist for Bengali, naming a son after a father or grandfather, a daughter after a mother or grandmother. This sign of respect in America and Europe, this symbol of heritage and lineage, would be ridiculed in India. Within Bengali families, individual names are scarce inviolable. They are not meant to be inherited or shared. Then what about the naming him after another person, someone you greatly admire? Mr. Wilcox says, his eyebrows raised hopefully. He sighs. Think about it. I will be back in a few hours, he tells him, exiting the room. The door shut, which is when, with a slight quicker of recognition, as if he knows it is all along, the perfect pet name for his son occurs to Ashok. He remembers the page completed tightly in his fingers, the sudden shock of the lantern glass in his eyes. But for the first time, he thinks of that moment not with the terror, but with gratitude. "Hello, Gogol," he whispered, leaning over his son, haunty faces, his tighter bundled boy. "Gogol," he repeats, satisfied. The baby turned his head with an expression of extreme concentrations and yawned. Ashima approved, aware that the name stands only for his son's life, but her husband's. She knows the story of the accident, a story she first heard with the polite, newly sympathy, but thought of which now especially makes her blood go cold. These are the night when she has been woken by her husband, muffled scream, times they have ridden the subway together, and the rhythm of the wheel on the tracks makes him suddenly pensive, aloof. She had never read any Gogols herself, but she is willing to place him on a shelf in her mind, along with Tennyson and the Wordsworth. Besides, it's only a pet name, not to be taken seriously, simply something to put on the certificate for now to release them from the hospital. When Mr. Wilcox returns with his typewriters, Ashok spells out the name. Thus, Gogol Ganguly is registered in the hospital files. "Goodbye, Gogol," Patty says, planting a quick kiss on his shoulders, and to Ashima, dressed once again in her wrinkled silk sari. "Good luck." A first photograph, somewhat overvexed post, is taken by Dr. Gupta that broiled hot, late summer's day. Gogol, an indistinct blanket mass, resporting in his viewery mother's arms. She stands on the step of the hospital, staring at the camera, her eyes squinted into the sun. Her husband looks on from one side, his wife's suitcase in his hand, smiling with his head lowered. Gogol entered the world. His father will eventually write on the back in Bengali letters. Gogol, first time home is a fully furnished apartment, 10 minutes by the foot to Harvard, 20 to MIT. The apartment is on the first floor of a 3-story house, covered with a salmon-colored shingles, surrounded by a waist-high chain-link fence. The grey of the roof, the grey of a cigarette ashes, matches the pavement of the sidewalks and the street. A row of cars parked at the meters perpetually lines one side of the crowd. At the corner of the block, there is a small used bookstore which one enters by going down 3 steps from the sidewalks, and across from it a musty shop that sells the newspaper and the cigarettes and the yaks, and where to Ashima's mild disgust a flurry backclat is permitted to sit as it pleases on the shelves. Other than these small business, there are more shingled houses, the same shape and sized and in the same state of mind, painted mint or lilac or powder blue. This is a house Ashok had brought Ashima to 18 months ago. Late one February night after her arrival at Logan's airport, in the dark, through the windows of a taxi, wide awake from the jet lag, she could barely make out a thing apart from heaps of broken snow gowling like a shattered bluish white bricks on the ground. It wasn't until morning, stepping briefly outside, wearing a pair of an Ashok socks under her thin soled slippers, the frigid New England chill piercing her inner ears and the jaw, that she would had her first real glimpse of America. The apartment is drafty during the winter, and in the summer entirely hot. The apartment consists of the 3 rooms, all in a row without a corridor. There is a living room at the front with a tree-sided window overlooking the street. A pass-through a bedroom in the middle, a kitchen at the back. It is not at all what she had expected. Not all like the houses which she has seen in the movies, with her brother and the cousin at the lighthouse and the metro. The thick glass window panes are covered by beady dark brown curtains. There are 7 roaches in the bathroom, emerging at the night from the cracks in the tiles. But she had complained none of this. She had kept her disappointment to herself, not wanting to offend Ashok or worry her parents. Instead, she writes in a letter home of the powerful cooking gas that flares up at any time of a day or night from 4 burners on the stove, and the hot tap water freezes enough to scare her skin, and the cold water safe enough to drink. The top 2 floors of the house are occupied by the landlords, the Harvard sociology professor and his wife. He has 2 children, both girls, Amber and Clover, aged 7 and 9, whose waist length hair is never buried and who plays on a warm days for an hours on a tree swing rigged to the only tree in the backyard. The professor, who had told Ashima and Ashoke to call him Alan, not Professor, as they had at the first addressed him, was a weary, rust-colored beard that make him look much older than he actually is. They see him walking to the Harvard yard in a pair of threadbare trousers, a fingered suede jacket, and the rubber flip-flops. Rickshaw drivers dress better than the professor here. Ashok, who still attends meetings with his advisors in a jacket and ties thick frequently to himself. The professor have a dull green Volkswagen van covered with the stickers question authority, give a damn, ban the bra pieces. They have a washing machine in the basement which Ashok and Ashima are permitted to share, a television in the living room which Ashok and Ashima can hear clearly through the ceiling. It has been through the ceiling one night in the April when Ashok and Ashima were eating their dinner. They hadn't heard about the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. and just recently of the Senator Robert Kennedy. Sometimes Ashima and Alan's wife Judy stand side by side in the yards, clipping cloths to the line. Judy always wears blue jeans torn up in the shorts one summer comes and a necklace of a small seashells around her throat. A red cotton scarf over her stringy yellow hair, the same textures and the shade of her daughter's, is always tied at the back of her neck. She works for a women's health collective in Somerville a few days a week. When she learned of Ashima's pregnancy, she approved of Ashima's decision to breastfeed, but had been disappointed to learn that Ashima was going to put herself in the hands of an medical establishment for her child's delivery. Judy's daughters were born at home with the help of an midwives at the collective. Some nights Judy and Alan go out, leaving Amber and Clover unsupervised at home. Only once, when Clover had a cold, did they ask Ashima if she could check it on them. Ashima remembered their apartments with an abiding horror just beyond the ceiling, yet so different from her own. Piles everywhere, piles of her books and the papers, piles of a dirty plates on the kitchen counter, ashtrays the size of serving platters on a bed piled with the glass, sitting momentarily on the edge of an Allen and Judy mattresses. She had cried out, failing clumsily backwards, startled to discover that it was filled with water. Instead of cereals and the tea bags, there were whiskey and the wine bottles on the top of the refrigerators, most of them nearly empty. Just standing there had Azima's feel drunk. They arrive home from the hospital custody of Dr. Gupta, who owns a car, and sit in a sweltering living room in the front of their only box fan. Suddenly, a family. Instead of a couch, they have 6 chairs. All of them were three-legged, with an oval wooden back and black triangular cushion. To her surprise, finding herself once again in the gloomy 3-room apartments, Ashima misses the hustle bustle of the hospitals. She can sarcastically sit. It is all suddenly unbearable. I can't do this, she tells Ashok when he brings her a cup of tea. The only thing he can think to do for her, the last thing she feels like drinking. If in a few days you will get the hang of it, he says, hoping to encourage her, unsure of what else to do. He sets the cup beside her on the falling window sill. I think he is falling asleep again, he added, looking at the Gogol, whose cheeks are working methodically at his wife's breast. I won't, she insists thickly, looking neither at the babies nor at him. She puts back a bit of a curtain, then let it fall. Not here, not like this. What are you saying, Azima? I'm saying hurry up and finish your degree. And then impulsively admitted it for the first time. I'm saying I do not want to raise Gogol alone in this country. It is not right. I want to go back. He looks at Azima, her face leaner, the features sharper than they had been at their weddings, aware that her life is in Cambridge and his wife had already taken a toll. On more than one occasion, he has come home from the university to find her morsels in the bed, rereading her parents' letters. Early morning, when he senses that she is quietly crying, he puts an arm around her but can't think of nothing to say, feeling that it is his fault for marrying her, for bringing her here. He remembers suddenly about the Ghosh, his companion on the train, who had returned from the England for his wife's sake. It is my greatest regret coming back, Ghosh has confessed to Ashok mere hours before he was killed. A soft knock on the door interrupts them. Alan and Judy and the Amber and Clover, all there to see the baby. Judy holds a dish covered with the checkered clothes in her hand. Says she made a broccoli quiche. Alan sits down, a garbage bag full of an Amber's and Clover's old baby clothes, uncovered a bottle of a cold champagne. The foaming liquid splashes onto the floor, is poured into the mug. They raise a mug to the Gogol, Azima and Ashok only pretending to take a sip. Amber and Clover flank Azima at either the side. Both delighted when Gogol wraps a hand around each of their fingers. Judy scoops the baby out of Azima's lap. Hello, handsome, she soaks. Oh, Alan, she says, let us have another one of else. Alan offers to bring us a baby's crib from the basement, and together he and Ashok assemble it in the space next to Azima and Ashoka's bed. Ashoka's goes out to the corner store and box of an disposal diapers replaces the Frankel black and white pictures of Azima's family on the dressing table. 20 minutes at the 3:50 for the quench. Judy says to Azima, holler if you need anything, Alan adds before they disappear. 3 days later, Ashok is back at MIT. Alan is back at Harvard's. Amber and Clover are back to the school. Judy is at work at the collective as usual, and Azima on her own with a Gogol for the first time in the silent house, suffering from a sleep depressive far worse than the worst of her lit lag. Sit by the three-sided window in the living room on a triangular chest and cries the whole day. She cries as she feeds him and she pats him to sleep, and as she cries between the sleeping and feeding. She cries after the milkman mailman visits because there are no letters from Calcutta. She cries when she calls Ashok at his department and he does not answer. One day she cries when she goes to the kitchen to make a dinner and discovers that they have run out of rice. She goes upstairs and knocks on Alan's and Judy's door. Help yourself, Judy says, but the rice in the Judy's cannister is brown. To be polite, Ashima takes a cup, but downstairs she throws it away. She calls Ashok at his department to ask him to pick up the rice on his way home. This time, when there is no answer, she gets up, washes her face and combs her hair. She changes and dressed Gogol and put him in a navy blue white wheeled prawn inherited from the Allen and Judy. For the first time, she pushes him through the balmy street of Cambridge to Purity Supreme to buy a bag of white long grain rice. The inordinate take longer than usual, for now she is repeatedly stopped on the street and in the aisles of the supermarket by perfect strangers, all American suddenly taking a notice of her, smiling, congratulating her for what she has done. They look curiously, appreciatively to the friend. How old? They ask. Boy or a girl? What his name? She began to pride herself on doing it alone in devising a routine. Like Ashok, busy with his teaching and research and discoration 7 days a week, she too now has something to occupy her fully, to demand her utmost devotions, her last ounces of the strength. Before Gogol's birth, her birthday has followed no visionable pattern. She would spend hours in the apartment napping, sulking, rereading her same 5 Bengali novels on the bed. But nowadays, that had once dragged, rush all too quickly towards the evening. Those same hours are consumed with Gogol, pacing the 3 rooms of an apartment with him in his hand. Now she wakes up at 6, pulling Gogol out of the crib for his first feeding, and then for half an hour she and Ashok lie with the baby in the bed between them, admiring the tiny person they have produced. Between 11 and 1, while Gogol sleeps, she gets dinner out of the way, a habit she will maintain for decades to come. Every afternoon she takes him out, wandering up and down the streets to pick up this or that, or to sit in an Harvard yard, sometimes meeting up with Ashoks on a beach on an MIT campus, bringing him some homemade samosas and a fresh thermos of tea. At times, staring at the baby, she sees pieces of her family in his face. Her mother glossy eyes, her father's slim lips, her brother low-eyed smile. She discovered a yardstone and began to knit for the coming winter, making Gogol's sweater, blankets, mittens and caps. Every few days she gives Gogol a bath in an proclaimed sink in the kitchen. Every week she carefully clips the nail of his 10 fingers and toes. When she takes him in his prawn for his immunization at the pediatrician, she stands outside the room and plucks up her ears. One day Ashok arrives home with an Instamatic camera to take pictures of the baby, and when the Gogol is napping, she pastes the square, white-boarded prints behind the plastic sheets in an album. Caption returns on the pieces of masking the tape. To put him to the sleep, she sings him the Bengali song her mother had sung to her. She drinks in the sweet, milky fragrance of his skin, the buttery sense of his breath. One day she lifted him high over her head, smiling at him with her mouth open, and a quick stream of an undigested milk from him His last feeding rises from his throat and pours into her own. For the rest of her life, she will recall the shock of that warm, sour liquid, a taste that leaves her unable to swallow another thing for the rest of the day. Letters arrive from her parents, from her husband's parents, from aunts and the uncles and the cousin and the friend, from everyone it seems but Azima's grandmother. The letters are filled with every possible blessings and good wishes, composed in an alphabet that they have seen all around them for the most of their lives, on billboards and the newspapers and everything, but which they see now only is these precious pale blue missives. Sometimes 2 letters arrives in a single week, 1 week there and 3. As always, Azima's keeps her trained between the hours of the 12 and the 2 for the sound of an postman footsteps on the porch, followed by the soft click of the mail slot in the door. The margin of her parents' letters, always a block of her mother hasty penmanship, followed by her father's flourishing, elegant hand, frequently decorated with drawings of animals done by Azima's father, and Azima tapes these on the wall over the Global's crib. We are dying to see him, her mother writes. These are the most crucial months. Every house there is a change, remember it. Azima's write backs with a careful description on her son, reporting the circumstances of his first smile, the day he first rolls over, his first squeal of delight. He writes that they are saving money for a trip home the following December. After Gogol's turn 1, she does not mention the pediatrician concern about tropical disease. A trip to India will require a whole new set of immunization, he has warned. In November, Gogol develops a mild ear infection. When Ashima and Ashoke see their son's pet name typed on the label of a prescription for antibiotics, when they see it at the top of his immunization record, it doesn't look right. Pet names aren't meant to be made public in this way, but there is still no letter from Azima's grandmother. They are focused to conclude that it is a lost in the mail. Azima decided to write to her grandmother explaining the situation, asking her to send a second letter with the names. The very next day, a letter arrives in the Cambridge. Though it is from Azima's father, no drawing for a gazelle adorns the margins, no elephants or parrots or tigers. The letter is dated 3 weeks ago, and from if they learned that Azima's grandmother had a stroke, that her right side is permanently paralyzed, her mid dim. She can no longer chew, barely swallow, remembers and recognizes little of her 80-old years. She is with us still, but to be honest, we have already lost her. Her father has written, "Prepare yourself, Azima, prepare you may not see her again." It is that first piece of bad news from the house. Ashoke barely knew Azima's grandmother, only vague recalls touching her feet at his wedding. But Azima is inconstable for the days. She sits at the home with Gogol as leaves her turn brown and drops from the letter trees. As day begins to grow quickly, mercilessly dark, thinking of the last time she was her grandmother, her Dida. A few days before lying to the Boston, Azima had gone to visit her. For the occasion, her grandmother had entered the kitchen after over a decade retirement to cook. Azima light a goat and potato stew. She had fed her sweets with her own hand. Unlike her parents and her other relatives, her grandmother had not admonished Azima's not to eat a beef or wear a skirt or cut off her hair or forgot her family the moment she has landed in Boston. Her grandmother had not been fearful of such a signs of betrayal. She was the only person to proceed rightly that Azima would never change. Before leaving, Azima has stood her head lowered under her late grandfather's portrait, asking him to bless her journey. Then she bent down to touch the dust of her Dida's feet to her head. Dida, I'm coming, Azima had said, for this was the phrase Bengali always used in the place of goodbye. Enjoyed her grandmother had bellowed in her thundering voice, helping Azima to straighten. With trembling hands, her granddaughter had pressed her thumbs to the tear, staring down Azima's face, wiping them away. Do what I will never do. It will be able for the best. Remember that. Now go. As the baby grows, so too does their circles of a Bengali acquaintance through the Nandis, now expecting a child of her own. Ashok and Azima met the Mitras, and through the Mitras the Banerjees. More than once pushing the Gogol in their stroller, Azima has been approaching on the street of Cambridge by the young Bengali bachelor, sighingly inquiring after her origin. Like Ashok, the bachelors fly back to Calcutta one by one, returning with their wife. Every weekend, it seems, there is a new home to go to, a new couple or a young family to meet. They all come from Calcutta, and for these reasons alone, they are friends. Most of them live within walking distance of one another in Cambridge. The husbands are the teachers, researchers, doctors, engineers. The wives, homesick and bewild, turn to Azima's for the recipes and advice, and she tells them about the cow that's sold in Chinatown, that it is possible to make halwa from cream of a wheat. The families drop by one another homes on Sundays afternoon. They drink tea with the sugar and evaporated milk and eat crimp cutlets fried in an chopins. They sit in a circle on the floor singing song by the Nazrul and Tagore, passing a thick yellow cloth bound books of and lyrics, among them as Dilip Nandi plays the harmonium. They argue ritually over the films of Ritvik Gautak versus those of Satyajit Ray, the CPIM versus the Congress Party, North Calcutta versus South. For us, they argue about the politics of America, a country in which none of them is eligible to vote. By February, when Gogol is 6 months old, Azima and Ashok now enough people to entertain on a proper scale. The occasion, Gogol's Anaprasam, his rice ceremony. There is a no baptism for Bengali babies, no rituals naming in the eyes of the god. Instead, the first formal ceremony of their lives centered around the consumption of the solid food. They asked Dilip Nandi to play the part of Asima's brother. He told the child and feel him rise. The Bengali staff of life. For the first time, Gogol is dressed as an infant Bengali groom in an pale yellow pajama, Punjabi from his grandmother in Calcutta. The fragrance of cumin seeds sent into the package along with his pajamas lingers in the weave. A headpiece that Azima's cut off the paper, decorated with a piece of an aluminium foil, is tied around the Gogol's head with a string. He wears a thin 14-carat gold chain around his neck. His tiny forehead has been decorated with a considerable struggle with sandalwood paste to form 6 miniature being moons floating about his brows. His eyes have been darkened with a touch of coil. He fidgets in his lap on his ordinary uncle, who sits on a bed cover on the floor, surrounded by the guests in front and behind and beside him. The food is arranged in a tin heaped in mean line, not silver or brass, or at a very last stainless steel. The final bowl contains a payish, a warm rice pudding Azima will prepare for him to eat on each of his birthday as a child. As an adult, even alongside a slice of an bakery cake. He is photographed by his father and friends, frowning as he researches for his mother's face in the crowd. She is busy setting up the buffet. She wears a silvery sari, a wedding gift worn for the first time, the sleeves of her blouse reaching the crook of her elbow. His father wears a transparent white Punjabi top over a bell-bottomed trouser. Azima set out the paper plates that has to be tripled to hold the weight of the biryani, the crab in young rest sauce, the dal, the 6 different vegetable dishes she had spent the past week preparing. The guests will eat standing or sitting cross-legged on the floor. They have invited Alan and Judy from upstairs, who looks as they have always do in jeans and thick sweaters because it is cold. Leather sandals buckle over the woolly socks. Judy eyes the buffets, bite in something that turns out to be an shrimp cutlet. I thought Indians were supposed to be an vegetarian, she whispered to Alan. Thank you.